Hello, I'm Rachel from Sefton Carer Centre, and this Carers' Rights Day, we're having some conversations with organisations who support unpaid carers across the borough of Sefton. I'm very pleased today to be joined by Andrew Booth, who is the CEO for Sefton Advocacy. Hello, Andrew.
Hi, Rachel. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Firstly, before we go into more detail, I was wondering, is it possible if you could perhaps just explain to our audience today a little bit about what Sefton Advocacy can offer? And then after that, perhaps if we could go through a few questions that we've had posed by some of our carers.
Sure, that would be that's absolutely fine. Sefton Advocacy is an independent charity in its own right. It's an amalgamation of two existing advocacy organisations in the borough who both had over 20 years experience of providing independent advocacy. And we've been a single organisation for about 18 months. And we provide advocacy to a wide range of individuals in the borough, normally from the age of 16 onwards, up until we've got quite a few people who are over 100. And the role of advocacy, the role of advocacy is to support an individual's voice with decisions they either need to make or have to make across a wide range of health, social care, and within communities. And I think that's the simplest way to describe it.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. So obviously, given the current circumstances with the global pandemic, our carers have been significantly impacted in a very difficult and challenging way with the circumstances. So I have a few questions, if that's okay, that I'd like to sort of run through with you on their behalf.
Sure.
It might just give a little bit more support and help to everybody out there and give them some direction. So first of all, what exactly is advocacy? And I think you've already mentioned, but if you can just remind us, what age can you legally have advocacy support from?
That's a good one. Technically, you can receive advocacy from the day you are born. Okay. And it exists within a legal framework for children. From the perspective of a community-based advocacy like ours, if someone is able to instruct an advocate, then technically you could receive advocacy at that point. And you try and base it on the ability of an individual to weigh up the reasons why they might want advocacy, to understand the issues that they have, and then the ability to instruct an advocate. And a lot of that work in younger adults and children happens within a statutory framework. Which is quite controlled. From the perspective of community-based advocacy, we work with young adults from 16 onwards who, for a variety of reasons, might require support to get their voice heard. And as long as they understand the reasons why they wish to do things and can communicate that, we can then support them either with a statutory framework or within communities to provide that. So from our own organisation's governance, we work with people who are 16 onwards, though we often work with parents who have younger children and the issues relate to the younger children, but we're supporting the adults.
Right, I see. Great, thank you. That's a really helpful answer. So, COVID lockdown. How do you think this has affected the service that you're able to provide at the moment?
Yeah, I don't think there's a service that hasn't been impacted by COVID, both either the disease itself or the pursuant lockdowns and restrictions. We've been able to continue to support clients, and we've also continued to take referrals. What we've had to do is find alternate ways of working alongside people. Okay, yeah. The vast majority of what we as advocates do is face-to-face, is working alongside the individuals who want our support and then with other professionals. So we've developed and improved our skills with a wide variety of electronic means, like everyone is: Zoom, Teams, Google Duo, Microsoft this.
You name it, you're doing it.
Yeah. What we are doing is that we are spending longer talking to clients than we did previously.
Right.
So where we might have a one-to-one meeting and then go away and do some work and maybe catch up a week later, we sometimes find that we're staying in touch more.
Okay.
So we're communicating either by email or telephone to support both the client, to let them know things are still going ahead, as well as trying to brief them as where things are up to. Some services are exactly the same. Other services are taking longer. So it's vital that the client feels engaged and connected. And sometimes it is because everyone's isolating in different ways, is actually we're becoming another part of the support that they can get. So cases might last longer, but actually we're more engaged with people as we go along. And where visits are important, and especially if someone's rights are not being adhered to, and a face-to-face visit is required, we would fully risk assess that and go ahead with it. We are still doing work within care homes and environments pursuant to the legislation as it stands on that day. And that's where the changes happen.
Yeah, I can understand at the moment. So, I mean, you mentioned obviously at the moment your discussions with clients are perhaps it's going to take longer.
Yeah.
Is there does that affect the waiting time that you have for clients to receive your support at all, Andrew? Does it mean it's taking longer to sort of be able to support somebody?
I think sometimes it does. It sometimes depends upon the capacity of us to respond. We have a finite number of advocates, and we're managing the advocates' time as best as we can. But at the same time, we're managing sickness and we're managing isolation within our own organisation. So sometimes we can respond quite quickly if it's a small issue that just needs some information. Where there is the potential for that to be a longer case, we may need to let the people know that it might take us a while to respond. And that very much is a case-by-case basis. We don't have the access to the number of volunteers we once did. And that again is due to COVID, isolation, and the fact that people have broader support networks to support now. As both as individuals and as members of staff, we have other family members and other things. So it's the broader responsibilities outside of just the day job that we need to factor in. But the one thing we hope we can do is let people know before we start how long things might take. So we're not creating any false hopes that it's immediate or as quick as we can be.
Yes, you can manage people's expectations and they can sort of work around it better then. So that's good.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of the service you offer, is there a cost attached to it? Does it cost people to use your service?
No, it's one of the central tenets of community-based advocacy is that our work is free at the point of delivery.
Wow, so, brilliant.
We will never ask people to pay for the service that we believe is a right, if I'm being honest. So my job is to find other people to pay for that. And we have contracts with the health service, with the local authority. And over the years, we've worked alongside Comic Relief, the Big Lottery, the Community Fund, and a host of other grant funders who believe in the work that we do and support us to provide it free of charge to clients.
Excellent. So would it be possible to give some examples of how you have, in the past supported unpaid carers? Because obviously for people listening to us today, it might be helpful to them to get an idea of whether you might be able to support them in any way.
Yes, I will. There's quite a few examples that run through my head, and I'm as an individual, I also function as an advocate from time to time. I'm currently working with an unpaid carer who is a mother to a young gentleman, and we're going through a whole series of child in need meetings alongside supporting her to fully explore all of the services that are available for this young man as he goes through education and through into adulthood. And that involves working alongside her with health professionals, social care professionals, and educational professionals to ensure that the many funding streams can meet what the young man wants, and support her to ensure that he's becoming independent, which is both his and his mum's aim. So that his voice gets heard without going through her. So supporting her to work alongside the differing professionals who have different processes, and in between that work, explaining what each of those mean and how to work a way through it. And that's one area of work that we do. The other area of work, and we work with a project that's delivering personal health budgets to people, is working with the carers and the responsible adults within that to ensure that their needs are met so that they feel they have a voice as it relates to the person that they're caring for. And because we're independent of the processes, we can also provide information and support around the other things that need to happen to make sure that the carer has a life as well. So the access to other things that aren't related just to the personal health budget, but relate to that carer's rights and that carer's ability to have quality of life. And that can be outside of health or social care. It can be accessing services delivered in communities by other voluntary organisations. Or it could be something simple, like where do I go for this piece of equipment, which will help me help the person I care for. So we don't just provide a voice, we also provide information to people to enable them to make the decisions and take things forward for themselves.
Excellent. Sounds a really comprehensive service you offer, and it gives, I suppose, reassurance to the carer that they're looking into every option possible to support themselves and their loved ones and those that they're caring for. So excellent. Obviously, at the moment, with the COVID restrictions as they are, a lot of carers' rights seem to be undermined significantly, and carers aren't able to see some of their loved ones if they're residents in care homes. This is perhaps something that's affected some of your clients, and I just wondered whether you could talk us through what rights do carers actually have at the moment to be able to see their loved ones?
Another thing that changes on a daily basis. I don't disagree. I really don't. I think the rights of individuals are compromised currently. Not just carers, but also individuals within care homes. Individual rights to access services like mine are also compromised. In the context of carers' rights to visit care homes, there is ever-changing guidance. And currently, as we are in lockdown 2, they are looking at how a care home can manage and facilitate access. It has been widely recognised that the visits and the family connections and the loved one connections are really important both for the individual and the carer, because it is your family, it is your mental health, it is your well-being that really needs to be supported. And if a care home can manage a visit in both a COVID secure way for the individual and the carer, and at the same time protecting all of the other residents, then it is deemed to be a positive way forward. And sometimes this is down to the physical layout of a care environment. There are a number of care homes who have built or developed pods, so COVID secure places where people can meet. There are care homes that are developing garden visits and their pod becoming a small gazebo and doing it that way.
Excellent.
And there are some care homes who physically cannot manage that. And that's where the difficulty arises, because they would like to, but they cannot compromise the health of everyone for the health and well-being of a visit. And the guidance and the legislation backs up the fact that if it is not possible, then it must remain not possible for the moment. With the rollout of rapid testing and mass testing and the potential for a vaccine early December, where care home residents would be the primary recipients, that could well change prior to Christmas. But currently it's accepted that it would be beneficial if it can happen, but the legislation backs up if it's not possible to make it happen.
Absolutely, but at least it's recognised that it is an important part of a carer and their cared for's mental health. So that's encouraging, certainly. Thank you.
It is encouraging, but I think it's been the challenge from carers that has, for want of a better word, forced the conversation around to that.
I see.
And it has been the argument that it's the health and well-being of everyone involved that benefits from it, because legislation is always very dry. So forcing the conversation about mental health and well-being and not just physical safety has created the change in the thinking around it.
Thank you. Another area that our carers have sort of raised with us is the fact that day centres have been significantly affected, and the availability of using day centres for their loved ones and their cared for. I just wondered, with the current restrictions, do you think as things change, as the pandemic restrictions are lifted, do you think that carers and the person that they care for will have a right for reinstatement of those day centre services post-COVID? Big question, I know.
It is, yeah, it is. Let's start with the rights. Your rights for that service are set in the Care Act. They are the rights of an individual to have a service if the needs assessment says it is what will benefit you. And although during the emergency legislation the government have put in place, it enables local authorities to ask for what's called easements to the Care Act, which means you could do things differently because of COVID. Sefton did not apply for easements, so the Care Act is still extant. However, because of the rules around social distancing and COVID safety, it has meant that day services have had to lessen the number of people who access them, as well as having less staff. So it's a balance in that sense. But we will assume that your needs will not change, whether the needs of the individual do not change, irrespective of COVID. So therefore, once things are back to a sense of normality, then you should be able to access what you accessed before. That's what we would hope would happen. Because if your needs do change, then you will have a new needs assessment, and things may change because of that. I think it would be naive to say that everything would be able to be funded as well as it was post-COVID as it was pre-COVID.
Right, yes.
And I think that's a factor that may come into account once people have to start paying for what has been spent during COVID. And that's not to say that day services would lessen. It may just mean that there will be new ways to deliver that type of support. So where in COVID or where pre-COVID you might have gone to a day service 5 days a week, post-COVID it may be 3 days a week because they've found a new service that can cope with the individual's needs for those 2 days. And that might be a buddy up system, or that might be an outdoor activity, or that might be another way of supporting someone. So I think we may see a new menu of services post-COVID, or that we've learnt about during COVID. But in terms of the basic rights of an individual, if your needs assessment says that's what you require, then the law says that's what must be provided. And so we would hope that that continues. Otherwise, the provider would be in breach of the legislation.
Sure. Well, that must offer some reassurance to carers out there. Thank you. And yes, as you say, we'll have to watch this space a little bit and see how things pan out in the coming months. One other area that our carers have talked to us about continuously over the last few months during the various different levels of restrictions we've had is having difficulties being the voice for the person they care for at appointments with their GP, or perhaps for welfare benefits. Can carers still attend this type of appointment? And if they can't, or perhaps for whatever reason are unavailable, could an advocate perhaps support a carer with those appointments if they're unable to?
Yeah, it's another unfortunate part of the restrictions around safety that's come into play. Most GPs are doing both face-to-face and virtual assessments and visits. We've seen an increase in face-to-face over the last few weeks, not least of which because the flu jab season is upon us. So they're managing access to surgeries in a COVID secure way. There are two things that are useful to know. If, as a carer, you have a lasting power of attorney for a person, then by law that you can support that person if you've got the lasting power of attorney, and that the GP surgery know that, then you are allowed to support them with whatever they need in their lives, which may well be visits to GPs. It just means that the GP has to manage that COVID securely. Within welfare benefits and welfare benefits visits, if you are the deputy for someone, then you are allowed to speak on their behalf in relation to their benefits. Now, access to face-to-face is going to be managed in a COVID secure way, but sometimes that needs to be virtual because people aren't, the organisations aren't doing face-to-face. So it might be virtual, but if you are the deputy, you have the right to represent. So they talk to you because you're the person responsible for your cared for's benefits. The difficulty that advocacy would have in this is that we would not hold an LPA, nor would we be a deputy. So we're reliant upon the GP or the benefits agency accepting us with an authorization letter from the carer or the individual. Now, some GPs are aware of it and use it, and in face-to-face visits it's easier, but virtually it's much more difficult for the other organisations to work with us, not least of which it's due to general data protection regulations, but also because virtually it's more difficult where a person has less capacity to speak for themselves. But in general terms, carers have the rights to be there if that supports the cared for's process. So GPs are normally more accepting of carers where it is all about the individual, and if they need them to be there to help both sides, then it can happen. And it all depends on what type of conversation you need with your GP or your benefits advisor. Obviously, the administering of medication, like a flu jab, is undoubtedly face-to-face, whereas a review of a person's condition, it may well be asked to be done remotely. And if you're in the same room, it's easier and acceptable.
That's good to know, certainly. Just on one point you made, Andrew, the lasting power of attorney, is that something you could help carers to go through the process to apply for if that was something they were interested in following up? Yes,
you can, an individual can apply online. It used to be that you had to go to solicitors. You can now do it sitting in front of a computer. And you can input the details, then you print off the forms, and the person to whom the LPA pertains has to sign it, and there's a whole raft of It's a legal document, so there's a whole raft of conversations around it. I'm not wishing to do solicitors out of business, but we wouldn't charge to support someone to do it. The person who the LPA pertains to has to pay for it, but we can support people through that and work either virtually or across a table from someone to go through the process of how it needs to be done. And it does make a great deal of difference for people, because it is a legal route for them to be able to support the person they care for. And there are two different types. There is one for finance and one for health and well-being. And don't quote me, but my last thought is they're about £80 each online to do. But it provides the security for both parties that they can then support that individual in both of those areas. Excellent.
That should be very helpful to a lot of our viewers. Thank you very much. So I think that's all the questions that we've had raised to be asked of you, Andrew. Thank you for your time. If you've got any further last points you want to make before we finish, but I really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
No, thank you. It is what we do. We wouldn't do this unless the systems weren't absolutely 100% perfect. And it's a shame, but people's voices sometimes get lost because systems don't recognise individuals. And our belief that everyone has a right to be heard is what we do it for. And we can never promise that we will get your voice agreed with, but we can always promise that we'll get your voice heard. And that's not us wishing to put the flag out there, but it is about everyone has the right to be listened to. And advocacy is much more professionally recognised than it ever used to be. And we, despite COVID, will continue to provide that support for people who wish to use us. And if we can help, then we always will.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. It has been a pleasure and thought-provoking.
Absolutely. Okay.
Thank you.